Welcome in, everyone. Today is another look at a new game coming out called One Military Camp. I played the demo not too long ago, and more recently I was provided with a little bit more access to check out the game a little further. This gives me the opportunity to build a little bit bigger of a base, play with specializations, and kind of see where the game is headed. Of course, this is a pretty early build, there's still a lot to add, so I don't want to be too critical on anything. Instead, I just want to see where they're headed with the game. I think if you are a fan of something like Evil Genius, you may like this. It's got sort of a carefree fun about it. It's a little bit more casual, but still it's got some depth to it in terms of what you can build and what you can do. Now, of course, if you are new to the channel, be sure to hit the subscribe button, leave a like and comment down below with your thoughts on the game. And if you haven't already, check us out at twitch.tv/Slay3K, where we play a variety of games live. Now let's dive in a little bit further to One Military Camp. Now I will say you start off with a pretty basic template for where you're going to be building. I also see that you have a pretty large build area to expand your base and build it the way you want. So what leads me to believe that there's a variety of things you're going to be able to do later in game in terms of missions. Now, speaking of missions, the game is largely focused on this mission-based system to gain research points and money to continue building out your base. You start with a pretty generous amount of cash, so you can get a lot of the foundational elements down. It is also sort of resource-based, where you need certain supplies and things to be able to keep your soldiers going, to keep the base powered, so on and so forth. You also need to be aware that you do have to recruit everything from sort of civilian workers to your military recruits, and then you have to assign them what their focus is, whether it's being a spy, infantry, or various other jobs that are in your base, depending on what buildings you have. In my playthrough, I really didn't have any sort of hiccups in the gameplay itself. The game played relatively smooth. I did have a little bit of issues with trying to figure out what I needed for certain areas. Some of the notifications that some of my hired employees or recruits had were a little bit confusing in times. Like, there wasn't really clear distinction as to what was going on. It almost seemed like they were auto-assigned to sleep in the barracks, but they actually needed to be in private housing. And that wasn't something I was selecting at the beginning. It also appears, based on the dialogue provided in the story mode, that you're going to have to handle your supply purchases a little bit. It won't just be automatic like it is now, which that could be interesting if you're into resource management. Now, since I'm talking about some of what the game is telling me to do, or telling me what will be available later, I do want to point out one thing that was a little bit frustrating. And that was the constant pop-ups of information telling me what the next step was. Now, in the top left of the screen, I tend to have, some sort of mark I need to hit, whether that's build a certain building. It's like task oriented. But I kept getting dialogue boxes of information that would pop up and it would halt gameplay. And I think the only problem was that it was so often that I often was taken out of whatever I was doing. I've got to a point where I just started skipping it all because I just wanted to do it on my own. Maybe that's just me. I can understand that in a tutorial mode, but I do hope that in the finished game, they will offer options to kind of shut that off. It may be that the game is still just in early stages, and this is something that will not be as necessary or as present in the finished game. That's entirely possible. Overall, the gameplay is really smooth, and the UI is pretty straightforward and to the point. There's not a whole lot of guessing when it comes to what you need to build and how to operate your base. I would like occasionally a little bit more information on some of the buildings when I'm like checking things or just trying to see where certain people are, but that may be something still in development. I think the basics of this game work very, very well. And again, it's pretty straightforward and you know kind of how to operate and move forward as you progress. I do like how I can freely build the base the way I want. Although I do want some bigger buildings. I want to take up some more space. So I imagine with the space that we have, you can duplicate certain areas and maybe create redundancy for, better development of your troops. Now, one of my favorite aspects of the game is going to be that you can get attacked. People can come in with drones and bomb. They can infiltrate your space. Again, sort of reminding me of Evil Genius a little bit. Now, I'm still learning how to work the tools of that. Obviously, taking out a drone makes sense with your little defense turrets, but I want to know more about the spies and some of the other defense mechanisms that exist, which I think you probably learn a little bit more about later in game. You also have to have someone manning a defense building, and that's like a separate role that you have to hire for. So there's some cool aspects to that. Power management and all that is pretty self-explanatory. And then as you build buildings, you can get different troops brought in, and that helps you complete missions. This is probably the biggest aspect of the game. Now, from what I've gathered, research systems are not in place yet, but you will gain research points by doing missions along with money to keep building your base. So there's a lot that they can build off of some of this. What's interesting is that certain missions require a certain selection of troops, sometimes multiple troops from one specialty. You'll have to keep that in mind as you're building your base to make sure you're recruiting people to fit those jobs. Now, these individuals can also get hurt, so if you only have one spy, but you're required to have a spy for a mission, they can't go out, so you need to have redundancy in areas. Now, there's another layer to specialties in that you can add a couple other things like speed training or accuracy training, and I assume that that just continues to increase stats across all of your soldiers. Another set of buildings are available for that. I didn't dive too far into this aspect of the game, although I would imagine that that's going to increase or decrease your ability to complete more advanced missions. Now, I love designing my areas, my bases, cities, whatever they are. I like to customize them, sometimes detail them, and this game offers those options. The game really allows you to customize and design your base the way you want, given that everything is plopped down manually, including the roads you need to place in order to create transit throughout the base. You could probably set up some really cool areas, and plus they added decorations, which is kind of a neat feature, although I do want to play with vegetation a little bit. Not sure if that'll be an option later. It does seem like there's a few little props and things you can put out to customize your base. Now, there's a significant amount of buildings, and with the customization options that exist, I can imagine that they could just continue to build off of that more and more. There's also an upgrade feature that seems to be built in. Currently, I didn't notice anything that was upgradable in my base, but I would imagine that this could further expand and diversify your buildings that you put down. Now, overall, what are my impressions? Well, so far in my playthrough, the game plays perfectly smooth. I had no issues playing it. There was no technical issue with visuals, frame drop, anything like that. I also like the casual nature to it. It's fun. It's a nice little time sink to get away from something else, and it's lighthearted. And at the base game level, just what I'm seeing now, there's a significant amount of buildings and things that are already in place. That's comforting because sometimes I'll play an early access game and there's like nothing to do. So this is off to a pretty good start. I would say there's some things that I really wish they would push more, or maybe they are planning on pushing more before the final release. I want missions to feel more intense. I want the stakes to be higher. Right now, like, you flip over cards to see if people are injured or how they're coming back, and that just didn't feel very powerful. I didn't feel like I was at risk of losing anything by sending people to a mission. Now, maybe that can be tailored or polished a little bit more, maybe added to closer to full release. We'll see. It's just my initial feedback. And considering it's like the main driver of the game, I do feel like it needs a lot of significance to it. Now, this isn't really an overall impression here, but I do really look forward to seeing what the research area looks like, what is all available under that, and how does that affect your gameplay? Because I do think this is an area to solve my previous concern. That's going to raise stakes because that's how you gain research points, by doing missions. Now, my understanding is that the game is about 20 hours of playtime to finish the main story. So I feel like there's quite a bit here that I haven't really touched yet or dialed into too far. And I think if you're a fan of Evil Genius or sort of casual, almost like RTS, a little bit of resource management style games, this might be for you. I also think with the customization options, a detailer or someone looking for a different challenge could have a little bit of fun with this. So if you are looking into this, you can check Steam sometime in early 2023 for release. And that's going to wrap up our first look at One Military Camp. If you enjoyed it, be sure to hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and drop a comment down below with your thoughts on the game, especially if you've already played it already. I'd like to hear what you think of it thus far. And follow us at twitch.tv/Slaythroughk for more live gaming content, and we'll see you next time.